Yeah. All right, Adam, thank you for joining the interns today. So we could ask you a few questions. Today, they're pretty focused on like internships, pathways, just like young career professionals. So we'll hop right into it. So our first question, what benefits do you think the Pathways internship program brings not only to the interns themselves, but also to the EPA?
Sure. Well, first I'll say it's great to see you all again. I keep bumping into you in elevators and hallways and meetings and briefings. So just thanks for showing up, and thanks for engaging, and thanks for not just helping us with our work, but just sharing your perspective on things. You have a different perspective and a fresher perspective in some ways. So I just want to start there. Related to that, the Pathways program and our other internship programs, it's a two-way street. So I think it's a chance for folks to, pull the curtain aside and step backstage and kind of figure out, what goes into the laws, what goes implementing the laws, what goes into implementing the programs, how do we work with different stakeholders, kind of all the stuff that goes into things that most folks take for granted every day, like flushing the toilet, having to go to a place where it's processed, or opening the faucet, or being able to see the skyline in their city. All that stuff doesn't happen by accident. So I think just the exposure to real work is great. But also for us, the environmental sector is advancing so rapidly. It's accelerating. And I said this, when we met a couple of weeks ago, because it has to in a lot of ways. Just the extreme weather, extreme heat that we've experienced this summer, we're in an emergency status. So we have to learn as quickly as possible. And you all, either in school or freshly out of school, are reading things and learning things and exposed to things that that many of us who've been in these positions, haven't quite experienced. We have our experience, and that's great. But you're bringing a perspective, not just through your education, but also your life experience. Having lived in a time of climate emergency. All of us are the climate generation, but you're more the climate generation than any other, and we need your perspective. So it's great in so many different ways, and I hope that you found the experience enriching.
Thank you, Adam. I really appreciate it. So, the next question that I have is, so what advice or perspective would you offer to young adults who are overwhelmed with the environmental related issues that we're going through that include, climate change and are disillusioned with the systems as it is?
Well, all systems are created by people. At some point in time, they created systems for commerce, for governance, for infrastructure. And like all systems, they require maintenance. They require folks to step up and fix things, to remake things from time to time. So, all of these systems, all the good things and the bad things are the result of people's action or inaction. So, we have a choice, right? We have a choice about what we do about it, if anything. And the good news is that there are pathways that we can do things to make a difference. And, many of us are on career tracks, including myself in the environmental sector, and that's great. And we need your gifts and talents and perspectives and energies. But folks who aren't in the sector also can do a lot. They can make sure that their homes are as sustainable as possible, their workplaces are, that they're educating family and friends about sustainable practices like reusable bottles or recycling, or making sustainable choices at the store, things like that. And also leaning in. There's a lot of frustrations with democracy, and I know that there's this is a time where there's all sorts of concerns about our republic. I get that, but there's room to lean in. Like, I'm standing outside of the Pennsylvania State House. I'm sorry I was late. I was in a meeting with one of the state senators' offices here, and anybody can get a meeting with these offices. Anybody can write an email. Anybody can contact their decision maker or their governor and ask them to pay attention to something that requires attention. So even though things seem overwhelming, all of us have agency, and not just ourselves, but to partner and inspire others to work together. And that's the work that we have. You know, every generation, we have to work together and roll up our sleeves.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great question.
Thanks for agreeing to talk with us today. My question is, what advice would you give to young people thinking of starting a career in government?
Go for it. We need good people, for sure, and we need thoughtful people and people who are inspired. You know, government is like any institution. It does its best when it has the best intentions behind it and the best people working. I've had much of my career in the public sector the last 20 years, and it's been so rewarding. And there's lots of rewarding sectors: nonprofit, you know, education, if you consider that separate from government. You know, and there's many. You know, business. You know, there's all sorts of ways to contribute. But the government is a chance where you're taking on a responsibility that I think is somewhat sacred. You know, we have the responsibility to look out for, you know, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people, and what they expect to represent, or what they would expect to represent had they known about it. A lot of our work is done behind the scenes, but it makes a real impact. And I can tell you, and I think that you've seen from your experience, there's lots of good people in government. And you know, sometimes, you know, government employees get a lot of criticism, but I think that comes from folks not really understanding or knowing the work that so many of them do. So so we need good people. You know, we need thoughtful people of each generation to take the reins, and all of us are doing the best we can with, you know, what we stepped into. You know, we were all at your stage in your career at some point. You know, we were like, well, that's pretty good, but that could be better, and this is how I'm going to help make that better, and I'm going to try to push for that. And that's what we're doing. But, you know, as we're moving through our careers, you're coming up and you're saying, well, that's pretty good, but that could be a little better, and I think we can try to do this. So so there's room for thoughtfulness, room for innovation. So, you know, however people want to engage in the government sector, whether it's executive branch or legislative branch or clerking for a judge, you know, it can really matter. But we need good people, not just talented people, but people with their hearts and minds in the right place. Yeah.
Awesome.
So for you, what have you enjoyed most in your internship? I'm going to interview you now. So what have you enjoyed the most? What's the most rewarding? What has made you think something that perhaps you didn't think before?
I've really loved the trainings, not just trainings, but like every week they have specific intern programming for us, whether it's like we did disc briefing, we had interview practice, which was amazing, with a bunch of managers last week, and like resume tips. So I found those like supplemental each week pathways intern programming where we can all get together and learn a variety of different things. Like we learned about the emergency response team with EPA one week and how they went out to Hawaii recently. I just have felt that's been a really valuable way for us to learn more about the agency and have like professional and personal development opportunities beyond just what we're doing day to day, like within our respective teams.
Oh, that's cool. So like sort of brass tacks stuff. Yeah, and I said this when I talked to y'all in the conference room couple of weeks ago, but you know, skills and experience is good, but working with other people is just as important a skill, and maybe a more important skill. So, you know, being able to communicate, being able to get consensus and buy-in, you know, those things lead to success as much as anything else does. But Joya, Aiden, what about you?
I thought it was really cool. I got to go on a couple of site visits, and it allowed me to connect all my work in the office to like big picture issues. I thought that was really interesting.
Oh, good. What sites?
So I got to go to a wetland mitigation bank out in Berks County, and we got to see how they do all the credit work, and how it's funded and what requirements each mitigation bank has to meet. And then another visit, we went down to Annapolis, Maryland, and we separated like SAV, submerged aquatic vegetation seeds from the Chesapeake Bay.
Oh, really cool. Excellent. And how about you, Joy?
So for me, I work in RecRa, so I guess something that's really stood out to me is that we're also making sure that people are safe and that the public is safe on the land that they're living on, or just, utilizing if they're working on the land. And I guess I just didn't really realize the public health aspect that goes into this. I knew that, the motto is to like protect the public, but I didn't realize that environmental also can go hand in hand with like public health and things like that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And just quality of life. Like we've been active in the city of Philadelphia more and more. And you might have seen some of our social media and just everyday stuff like illegal dumping or vehicles idling or trucks idling in a neighborhood. Just sort of these everyday things that are environmental and our public health and our everyday quality of life, all add up. So yeah, I think there's more sophistication around how we think about environmental protection now, that it's not just about forests or the Chesapeake Bay or these sort of distant, sort of abstract, iconic things, but they're also like everyday things, everyday quality of life, everyday public health exposures. So that's cool. That's really great. I'm glad you made that connection and had a good experience working with the RCRA folks. All right, Noelle, what else? Do you have any thoughts, anything to contribute? Noelle is in between intern and older bureaucrat me. So anything from your perspective, Noelle?
Yes, I've only been here for almost 9 years, yet that is still very, very new on the EPA work scale. No, I just I kind of echo what you all said. I think about previous internships I did, and how cool it is to kind of see how what you're learning in school on the academic side is actually getting implemented, in the real world. I think you've all brought really great positive energy to the agency. We loved having you here and, getting to learn about you and, all the cool new ideas that you've brought to the agency. So I was telling Adam earlier, you're kind of like our little group of celebrities, and everyone's like, oh my gosh, the interns, like they're here. Like, so that's just some positivity and excitement you've brought to our region. So we really appreciate that. And obviously your new ideas, like this interview you're doing right now for social media. So yeah, I think it's really great that you've decided to spend your summer with us. Obviously you've learned a lot and got a lot of good experiences, and we appreciated having you here.
Yeah, I echo all of that for sure. And yeah, I got so much out of my internships. Even today, I think about them and what I learned from them. So I hope you keep reflecting on it. And as I said in the meeting, continue to not be shy, and asking for things or asking for information or seeking opportunities. And sometimes things work out and sometimes they don't. And that's fine if they don't. But to also be like, hey, I was runner up for this position, just curious if you have any advice for me. Just like always lean in and engage. That's why you hear the word engage. When you engage, like things you figure out. And the senator's office I was meeting with here, it's a Republican senator. Obviously I'm part of a Democratic administration. And early on, I was like, met with him. He was the chair of a committee, very powerful. And I was like, hey, I want to work together, And then we figured out how to work together, and they passed all sorts of pro-environmental legislation in a bipartisan way here. And part of it was because we engaged. We said, hey, we would love to work together. We think this would be good. Let's get the politics out of it and just serve the people. So things happen when you're not shy. Things happen when you lean in, when you make things happen. So please take that with you from your experience here, and please remain in contact with all of us. We're happy to help you throughout your career any way that we can.
Thank you, Adam. This was awesome. We really appreciate your time. I know you have a busy schedule and a busy day, so I hope you have a good rest of your time going to Lancaster this evening and in Harrisburg. But yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah.
Thank
Thanks a lot.
you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You bet. Enjoy the rest
Bye.
of the day.
Hey.
Thank you.
See you soon.